Well, the Tinies have officially taken over, and your Datapack is broken, maybe, probably. So, without further ado, if you have a Datapack that is working in the previous version, which is Minecraft 1.21.11 Mounts of Mayhem, then this video will show you how to get that pack working again in 26.1 Tiny Takeover. To start us off, an additional restriction has been placed on a Selector type text component. So apparently, and I didn't even know this until this change happened, if you were previously using a text component to grab like the name of an entity using a selector, then you were able to put like trailing data after that selector, and that data just wouldn't do anything. But this was perfectly legal, so this right here is equivalent, or it was in the previous version, equivalent to just saying @s with nothing after it. The change is that you just can't do that anymore, so if for some reason that is something that you were doing, like maybe in a macro or whatever, you now have to specifically code such that the selector is the only data in this string right here. Now to be clear, you can still have like selector arguments that go in square brackets like that, you just can't have more data here, you know what I mean? Alright, and the next change pertains to banners and signs that stand up on the ground. So I'm specifically talking about signs that are placed on the ground like this, and not the wall signs and wall banners that are placed on the sides of blocks like this. These types of signs have a rotation block state that ranges between 1 and 15, I believe. The change is that when you set block signs and banners, that rotation now defaults to 8 instead of 0 like it did before. Now this means that if you actually were specifying the rotation before, then nothing will actually change, you're all good, but the thing to watch out for is that if you were set blocking a sign or a banner and you weren't specifying rotation at all, that means the rotation was defaulting to 0. In the new version, you now need to specify rotation equals 0 to keep that command working the same, because if you don't, it will default to 8 instead, and all your signs and banners will be backward from the way they were before. Next up, we've got a change to the way that villager inventories interact with commands. So if you were using item replace or any of the item commands to modify a slot on a villager, so like villagers have an internal inventory, if you're using like villager.someNumber as the name of the slot, then this slot ID right here has been changed to mob.inventory. Whatever number you were using. I think it goes like between 0 and 8 or something like that. So villager.anynumber is now mob.inventory.anynumber, because this command now also works on other mobs like piglins, for example. Now do note that this is only the slot IDs from like the item replace command. This doesn't have anything to do with the actual villager NBT, so that has not changed at all. But on the topic of entity NBT, there actually has been a slight change to player NBT. I don't know how anyone would have been using this field under players, because it was only ever present for like very short periods of time and didn't provide very helpful information. But if for some reason you were referencing this ignore fall damage from current explosion NBT field under players, you can no longer do it because it's just been straight up removed from the game. I'm not really sure if there's a workaround for this. If you do find one, let me know in the comments. Alright, and in terms of just command stuff, that is actually all of the changes, but outside of commands we're only just getting started, so strap in. Next up, we've got a pretty big change to entity variants, specifically some animal variants, which is to be expected because the bulk of this drop is about baby mobs. The first big change applies to cats, chickens, cows, and pigs. I'm just going to use cats as an example, but do be aware that these changes apply in exactly the same way to all 4 of those entity types. So this is an example of what a cat variant definition might have looked like in the previous version. You just have an asset ID that points to like the cat's skin, and then you have some spawn conditions, and now nothing about these spawn conditions have changed, which is why I just put ... right here, but in your actual data pack you would just have something here, and it won't be affected by this update. In the new version, we now have a new field that is also required called baby asset ID that points to the skin of what the mob should look like when it's a baby, because the babies now use different models from the adults and the skins are also different. Right, so like I said, cats, chickens, cows, and pigs have all had this new field added to their variant definitions, and you just upgrade them all in the same way. Wolves, on the other hand, are a little bit different. So before we just had assets with angry, tame, and wild, which were just the skins for the 3 different states of the wolf, and again we also had spawn conditions. The new version requires you to specify baby assets, which is another object with the same 3 fields, but just for when the wolf is a baby. There's also been a change to wolf sound variants. So previously these files were just a single object with just a bunch of different sounds that the wolf could make. In the new version, every single one of these fields has been moved into a new object called adult sounds. So whatever you were specifying before, they all have to go under adult sounds. And then, as you could probably guess, there's a new field called baby sounds, which is another object with all of the same fields, but for the baby sounds. Now another thing you may have noticed is that under both of these objects, there's actually a brand new sound file called step sound. Now if you don't have a custom step sound, you can always just point to entity.wolf.step. It turns out every single vanilla wolf sound variant, they all point to this same step sound file. So there's actually no step sound variation in vanilla, but it's there now and you can change it if you want to. Same goes for the baby sounds as well. Alright, and that's it for mob variants. Next up, we've got a pretty minor change to enchantments. And specifically, we've got a change to post-piercing attack, this enchantment component that triggers whenever, you use a piercing weapon. In the previous version, I don't know how many of you know this, but this post-piercing attack trigger has an implicit restriction that prevents it from working if the player is below 7 hunger. You have to have at least 7 hunger points in order for this trigger to work at all. That's how it used to work. The change is that it's no longer restricted that way, and if you want it to keep working that way, you now have to add this predicate that specifically tests for if the player is, at least 7 hunger points. Now, if you don't make this change, all that will happen is that the post-piercing attack trigger will now work all the time. It won't be restricted to if you're at low hunger anymore, which I actually have a feeling some of you want that, so there will probably be some of you who don't want to do this update. I've actually made a video before about the insane usefulness of that trigger, and in my opinion, when you're using that trigger, it's probably best to not have that hunger restriction at all. But if you were in fact relying on that hunger restriction, then this is how you update. Alright, and next up, we've got a change to just the way that time works. The big difference between this version and the last one is that time is no longer universal. There can now be multiple instances of time that are all running at once side by side and might be running differently from each other. They're called world clocks, and I know that sounded a little bit confusing, but the upshot is that there's just a couple changes we have to make to some of our time-related aspects in our data packs. So first off, there's been a couple of changes to the /time command. The big upshot is that now whenever you're doing /time anything, you can specify of and then whichever world clock there are. So currently there are 2 vanilla world clocks, one for the overworld and one for the end, but everything that previously relied on time now relies on the overworld. The stuff that relies on the end is brand new, so you don't really have to worry about it if you're just upgrading. But basically how this works is if you say time of overworld, then the rest of the command can just be, the rest of what would normally be a time command. So you can do like add, pause, query, rate, resume, set. I think at least some of these were, carried over from the previous versions. Basically the upshot is that if you were previously doing like time set, new 6000 for noon or something like that, it's now better to do time of overworld set noon. Now there's no difference here if you're running this command from the overworld, but if you're running it from anywhere else, then this, just time set 6000 will actually not work at all. So you have to do time of overworld set 6000. To summarize it a little bit more succinctly, you now have to add of overworld to the beginning of any time command, provided you are not running it from the overworld. If you are running it from the overworld, then there's technically no change you have to make. The one exception to this is /time query game time, and this command is still universal. So you can see it told me, what time it is in ticks as an absolute time. And then the final change is that if you were previously doing /time query daytime, this no longer works. You now have to do /time query day, right? So time query day now accomplishes what time query daytime used to accomplish. Now, time query day is also a previous command, so if you were doing that before, you now have to do time query day and then say repetition. I know that's all also a little bit confusing, but yeah, time query daytime goes to time query day with maybe Minecraft before it, and then time query day goes to time query day repetition. Alright, and that's it for the time command, but there is still quite a bit more time related stuff to cover. So first of all, there's a new required field under dimension types. So here I've basically just ripped the vanilla overworld dimension type. The new required field is default clock, and if you just set it to Minecraft overworld, this will recreate how it worked before. And then for dimension type specifically, there's also a brand new, unrelated field that is still required, which is has Ender Dragon fight, and it's just true or false based on whether you want there to be a dragon in that dimension. Timelines now also have a new required field, so if you had a timeline that looked something like this before, you've got to add a clock, which again you can just set it to Minecraft overworld to recreate the previous behavior. The time check predicate type has now also been changed to require a clock, which again you can just set to overworld, and at this point you are starting to see the pattern. The time of day game test environment now also requires clock, and you can set it to overworld. So all in all, this has affected the time command, dimension types, timelines, the time check predicate, and the time of day game test environment. And that's it for time stuff, just a lot of little tedious but easy changes that you gotta make. Alright, and now it's time for by far the biggest change in this version, which has to do with Worldgen Features. And when I say features, I really do mean the technical term feature, which includes things like placing flowers, placing grass, trees, and stuff like that. So, what changes have been made to features? The overarching theme throughout all these changes is that a lot of them have been generalized to allow for more customization, but in turn that comes with more things that you have to specify if you're going to be using those features. To start off, if you were previously using the Forest Rock Worldgen feature, which I think was primarily just the mossy cobblestone boulders that you find in Mega Taiga biomes, you were previously able to edit what block got placed, and that was it. The change is that it has now been renamed from Forest Rock to Block Blob, and it also has this brand new field called Can Place On, which is just a block predicate. Now, if you work with Worldgen features, you probably know what a block predicate is. The one that I'm showing here is just the vanilla one that they use for the Taiga Forest Rocks. And of course, it does exactly what it sounds like. You can just use this field to specify the types of blocks that this feature can appear on. Next up is a change to the Ice Spike feature, which previously had no config at all. In the new version, it's now just named Spike, so you've got to change it from Ice Spike to Spike. And its config has Can Place On, just like before. It's also got Can Replace, which are the types of blocks that the spike can replace as it spawns in, which I think is mostly just air, but you get to specify which blocks it is all you want. And then finally, you actually can specify what state of block gets placed by this spike. So it no longer has to be packed ice, right? It could be like dripstone, for example, if you want it to be a giant rock spike. A similar change has happened to the huge red mushroom feature as well as the huge brown mushroom feature, so this applied to both of them. There's just another new field called Can Place On, which is exactly, the same thing we've already been talking about. It's just another block predicate. And then finally, there's been a bit of a change to the way that the disk feature actually places the blocks that it's made of. So before, you had this hard-coded state provider, which was, rules with some stuff in there, and then fallback with some stuff in there. And previously, this was like a hard-coded format. In the new version, the state provider field is actually a general block state provider, and block state providers have, multiple different types. So if you want to keep this state provider working the same way it worked before, all you have to do is specify its type, which is rule-based state provider. Now, they made this change so that you can specify other types of state providers here, and this is a new type that just matches what you could previously only do with disks. Next up, we've got a couple of changes to trees. So first off, the alter ground decorator type, which is used by mega pine taigas and stuff like that, has basically been completely changed. So before, you just had a provider with a block state provider that goes right here. In the new version, provider just has this rules field, which is just a list of rules, and for each rule you have to specify if true, which is a block predicate, and this particular block predicate was previously hard-coded, so if you want to keep it working the same way as before, you just specify this exact block predicate. And then each rule also has a then field, and the then field is the simple state provider that was previously just under provider before. So whatever went here now has to go here. And again, that's only if you happen to be using the alter ground decorator type under decorators, which is only under tree. Lots of really niche specific stuff in this update. Now, also under trees, there were two fields called Force Dirt and Dirt Provider. Now, the change here is that both of these fields have been removed. So if you were specifying them before, then you just don't specify them anymore. Now, in the specific case that you were saying Force Dirt is true and not false, then there's a new field you need to add, which is the below trunk provider, and it basically just looks like this. I'm using an azalea tree as an example, so I've got the rooted dirt simple state provider, but again, you can set this to whatever you like. And then finally, last but not least, when it comes to Worldgen features, we've got a change that's a little bit more in depth, and it involves these random patch features as well as the flower features. So random patch and flower were previously basically just the same thing, but one of them worked with bone meal and the other one didn't. There's now a feature tag for if the feature is going to work with bone meal, which means both of these features have been sort of combined into one, and what ended up happening was that the actual configured feature types were both removed, and all of their functionality now exists in the placed feature. So the placed feature decides where the features are going to go, and then it calls upon a configured feature to actually, spawn the blocks that it needs to spawn. Okay, so how exactly does this work now, and how exactly does it work in relation to the way it used to work? So let's say that before we had a placed feature that looks like this, where you just had, some placement settings under placement, and then it used this field to point to a configured configured feature. The configured feature could have looked like this. It could have been like a random patch or a flower. The flower feature had all the same config fields as random patch. It had a number of tries, an XZ spread and a Y spread, and then another placed feature right here that would call upon another configured feature and then had more placement settings, right? This was a really confusing system. I'm very glad they've changed it. How this looks in the new version is that almost all of this stuff has been moved back to the original placed feature that I just showed you right here. So first of all, the tries field under config is now a Minecraft count placement setting, right? So if we're looking in this placed feature, everything right here is just the stuff that was previously right here. You know, whatever settings you had before, you just want to keep them around so they could go like right there. But yeah, tries has been moved to Minecraft count. It's just another setting. The XZ spread and Y spread have been moved to another placement setting, which is called random offset. And specifically, what you want to do is use, you know, XZ spread is a trapezoid with min -5, max 5, and plateau 0. And the 5 just comes from whatever was right here before, right? So if you had 5 here, then it should be plus or minus 5. Similarly, whatever you had with Y, you want to do plus or minus that in the Y spread one. Again, with a trapezoid type, you're going to do plus or minus 3. Under this previous file, if you had any placement settings right here, then you're just going to add those placement settings onto the end of, you know, the rest of these placement settings. They're all going to be in one big combined list now, so it's a lot easier to see all of them at once. And then finally, we've basically stripped down this entire file, right? We've moved all of these, we've moved this. The only thing left is this big object, and the change is that this should now just be the entire file. So everything I've got highlighted, well, the new configured feature should now just be that part. It should look like this. To summarize, the random patch and flower configured feature types have been removed. All of their settings have been moved to the placed feature that first placed them, and then the internal nested configured feature that used to be that random patch or flower is now just the whole file. It was a random patch that contained another feature that contained another feature that contained this simple block, and now the simple block is just the whole file. If this is confusing, as always, this Datapack is available to download in the video description. You can just download it, play around with it, look at all of the differences. Hopefully that'll be helpful. Or you can just keep rewatching this video over and over again. I would appreciate that. And with that, that is it for Worldgen Features. Next up, we've got a big change, and I mean like a lot of changes, to crafting recipes. But the changes are only to a whole bunch of like previously hard-coded special recipe types that I doubt anyone was using because they were incredibly hard-coded and pretty much all of their functionality had already been implemented by the vanilla game, so no one would have any reason to use them. But if for some reason you were using one of these crazy special recipe types, like crafting special map cloning, for example, there are a whole bunch of these, then I'm just going to scroll through the list of changes. I don't really feel like I need to show you some like concrete examples. If this really applies to you, then just read the changelog carefully because I want to get through this as fast as I can. Let's go. Crafting special map cloning is now covered by crafting transmute. Crafting special armor die has been renamed. Crafting special tipped arrow has been renamed. And again, you can pause the video and read all of these caveats if this stuff applies to you. Crafting special banner duplicate has changes. Crafting special book cloning has changes. Crafting decorated pot has changes. Crafting special firework rocket, firework star fade are all, you know, expanded now. Map extending and shield decoration. And that is all of the recipe changes. It is a lot. Again, you can download this data pack and, you know, view all of the changes for yourself, or just pause the video as I scroll through them here, because I want to move on to the last change. Last but not least, actually last and very close to least because this one's tiny, we've got a bunch of vanilla asset changes as always. So first off, renamed block tags. All of these block tags have been renamed in the following ways. You can pause and read all of them if you want. Now, one to note is that hashtag dirt has technically been renamed to substrate overworld, but dirt does still exist. It's just that the new dirt is now very different from the old dirt in that it actually has a lot fewer entries. The tag substrate overworld now plays the role that dirt used to play. So you can decide how to handle that yourself. The dyeable item tag has been removed. If you were using it or referencing it, then all you have to do is just redefine it in your own pack. We've also got a bunch of removed enchantment tags, so it really just had to do with what enchantments were traded by what villagers of which biomes, and these tags were only present if you were using the villager trade rebalance experimental data pack. Now, if you were using these tags to set up special trades, then you now have to use the data-driven villager trade system, and I've left some links right here which I'll also post in the video description if you want to read up on how to use that new system. Again, that feature was only ever in an experimental data pack, so I doubt many people were using it at all. And last but not least, we've got a bunch of vanilla recipes that were renamed. I will scroll through through them all very slowly here, or like I said before, you can download this pack from the description below. All of them have something to do with stone cutting. And that, mis amigos, is everything. If you follow all of the steps that I outlined in this video, you should get your data pack that was working in the previous version up to snuff and working in this new version. As always, good luck updating your packs. I have been Conyer. Thank you so much for watching, my dudes.